In the bright summer season, the day starts as early as 5 or 6 o'clock, with clouds rising on the outskirts of the city. By noon, the scorching sunlight, reflected through glass curtain walls, becomes unavoidable. Summer had interviewed at 5 law firms early in the morning, but the results were far from ideal. During lunch break, holding her phone, she listened to her friend complaining about the demanding conditions for recruiting unpaid labor in the company. She nodded absent-mindedly and inserted coins into the vending machine. Amidst the clattering sound, as she reached for a drink, her resume fell to the ground. The one-step skirt was like a modern woman's straitjacket, suitable only for standing like a statue, unfit for any movement. Carefully holding the skirt, preparing to squat down, a hand reached out from in front of her. A small, elegant section of wrist bone, revealed by the crisp white shirt cuff, swiftly and gracefully picked up her fallen resume. The sunlight was blinding, and as Summer stood up, she lowered her head and said, "Thank you." However, the person did not show any intention of returning the resume. Summer grew annoyed at this cliché approach to starting a conversation. She raised her head and was about to say, "Could you please?" but was suddenly choked. How could it be him? The man in front of her stood tall, towering over her even in high heels. Against the sunlight, his sharp phoenix eyes showed impatience. For a moment, her heart raced, almost like the prelude to heatstroke. "Sorry, Summer felt a bit at a loss, not knowing what to say. She wanted to ask him when he returned to a city, and why he didn't go back to the apartment. But she quickly suppressed these questions. What right did she have? "Take it." The flat voice echoed above her, with a hint of coldness. Summer quickly took out the drink from the vending machine and reached for the resume in his hand. He didn't even look at her again. The man and his companion left. It seemed as if he didn't know her at all. The phone on the other end continued its noise, and she responded absent-mindedly. Her mind was in chaos. This chaos persisted throughout the afternoon interviews. Her distraction was so apparent that even the interviewer noticed and jokingly said, "Summer, are you daydreaming because you feel confident and have no pressure to secure a position at YunTu, one of the top law firms in a city?" YunTu was one of the best law firms in a city. She had applied with just a hopeful mindset, and even getting an interview opportunity had excited her. But now, she had messed up this chance. Feeling dejected, she returned to her residence. The apartment on the top floor of the building was spacious and minimalist, maintaining its cleanliness thanks to the weekly cleaning by the housekeeping service. She took off her shoes at the entrance, walked through the corridor barefoot, and cautiously collapsed on her bed. Then, she thought of him. For years without seeing each other. When did he return to the country? She had no idea. No news, and he had never returned to this apartment. Was it because of her usurping the nest? He still hated her, didn't he? The first time Summer saw Winter, she knew he disliked her. In the solemn and pale funeral hall, she was pushed in front of him. She was small at that time, only reaching his waist, timidly tilting her head to look up at him. The young man's posture was upright, radiating an aura that warned strangers to keep their distance. In the backlight, she saw his thin lips pressed together without a hint of warmth. When they left, she subconsciously wanted to hold his hand, but he just slightly turned away, effortlessly avoiding her attempt. The mournful relatives and friends in the funeral hall didn't notice this small incident. She, however, stood still, looking at her own hand. The awkwardness overwhelmed her like a tide. But in the end, he did take her along, this unwanted companion. Summer, carrying an old backpack, followed him back to the top-floor apartment in the building. The young man's residence was minimalistic, with cool tones, clean, and spacious. She lowered her head, watching her old shoes leave dusty imprints on the smooth marble floor. It seemed like there was no place for her here. Even though she was so small and had nothing but a backpack filled with old clothes. "You'll sleep there from now on." He poured a glass of water on the island counter, pointed to a room, and left her alone in the spacious living room, heading to his own room. The unfamiliar environment and the fear of the future plunged her into endless nightmares that night. But in the darkness, she was awakened by a cool hand. He stood by her bed, frowning at her. "You're noisy." He had long, narrow phoenix eyes, a classical and elegant eye shape. When he frowned at someone, his gaze was sharp and indifferent. But it was undeniable that he was handsome, a beauty as cold as the moon seen through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the skyscraper, without a hint of warmth. "I'm sorry." She lowered her head timidly, and cool tears slid down her cheeks, collecting on her pointed chin. He stared at her coldly for a while, pursed his lips, but inexplicably extended his hand. The tear fell into his palm, icy to the bone. Summer was momentarily stunned by this unexpected gesture. She looked up at him, and through the blurry tears, the young man's face seemed surprisingly gentle. "Big brother." She couldn't help but say timidly. She was scared and urgently needed someone to rely on, so she gathered the courage to ask, "Can I call you Big Brother?" Silence filled the room. The young man in front of her silently smiled, the sharp curve of his lips like a blade. "No, you can't," he said, each word cold and merciless. "Summer, remember, you and I will never have any relationship in this lifetime." The memory of those indifferent eyes from the past and the encounter under the office building today overlapped. She buried her face in the pillow. Perhaps it was time to find a place to move out. He had already returned, and she was no longer the helpless little orphan from back then. The call from YunTu came a few days later. She had moved to a new place and was busy sorting out her belongings. Initially just a small backpack, she hadn't expected to accumulate several large cardboard boxes over the years. The voice on the other end said, "Miss Summer, congratulations on passing the interview. Can you come for orientation next Monday?" For a moment, Summer was dumbfounded. She nodded repeatedly, then remembered the person on the other end couldn't see her and quickly added, "Yes." After hanging up the phone, she flopped onto the bed, feeling ecstatic. She hadn't anticipated that on the other end of the call, the HR sister hung up and turned to Lawyer Lao Chen, asking, putting in so much effort, "Lawyer Chen, do you have your eyes on her?" Lawyer Lao Chen looked around, seeing that Winter wasn't there, and chuckled, "I saw Winter helping her pick up documents downstairs that day." "Winter, the lawyer?" Linda was also surprised. "Yeah, strange, right? That guy clearly follows the mind-your-own-business mentality and is quite cold-blooded." He nodded, and she strangely found herself agreeing. Thanks to Lawyer Lao Chen, even before Summer arrived, gossip had quietly spread throughout the law firm. When she reported on Monday, she felt strange gazes from her colleagues, but she didn't think much of it. Linda introduced her to the various departments of the company and finally led her to an office door. She knocked and said, "Lawyer Winter, I brought the new assistant." Before Summer could understand what Linda meant by her tone, the door had already been pushed open. She raised her eyes, and her anxious gaze collided with the man behind the spacious office desk. Her mind went blank, and before she could say anything, Winter had already furrowed his attractive brows. "Why is it you?" There couldn't be a more awkward reunion, Summer thought. Actually, Winter had always been impatient with her. He disliked her, to the point where even sharing a room was unpleasant. She was young at that time, but she already understood how to read people's expressions. He didn't like her, so she tried to appear in front of him as little as possible. She left for school before he woke up in the morning, and once she returned to her room at night, she never left again. There were even months when the two of them didn't meet. After changing schools, she was harassed by local troublemakers outside the school. Fortunately, the patrolling police saved her, taking her to the police station. When asked to call her parents to pick her up, she could only give out his number. He arrived at midnight. The police questioned him about his identity due to his young age. When she saw him, she could only tell a rare lie, "He's my brother, my parents are on a business trip." When they left the police station, he glanced at her, his long eyes filled with impatience. "You're even more foolish than I imagined." She could only lower her head and mumble, "I'm sorry." But the next day, a car from Winter's family picked her up at the school gate, taking her to and from school without fail until her college entrance exams were over. He probably didn't want to go to the police station to pick her up a second time, Summer thought. After work, when everyone at the law firm had left, Summer hesitated at her desk for a long time before finally getting up and knocking on his office door. He hadn't left yet, reading through case files in the office. When he saw her, he said indifferently, "What's the matter?" "Sorry." She lowered her gaze, looking at the carpet patterns on the floor. "I will explain to HR. I won't come to work tomorrow." He didn't speak, his gaze still on the case files. Summer bit her lip, just about to leave, but heard him calmly say, "I thought you would understand how to respect others' time." She paused, "What?" "HR hired you with considerations. Quitting right after joining, I think you are wasting other people's time." Summer stood there dumbfounded for a while, then turned to look at him. The man still wore a cold expression, but in her heart, a strange feeling suddenly surged. It felt as if he was trying to keep her. She was silent for a while, and finally, Winter raised his head, coldly saying, "Anything else?" Shaking her head, she inexplicably wanted to laugh. "No, I'll go back now." She turned to leave after a few steps but suddenly remembered something. Turning back, she gathered the courage to say, I moved out. I handed the keys to the property management. You can go back now. He glanced at her, his gaze deep and complex, with emotions she couldn't comprehend. Got it. After a while, he responded somewhat impatiently. Winter pressed the switch, and the lights above illuminated the living room. With the door in hand, he walked into this long-lost apartment, only to find that it hadn't changed at all since he left. The magazines casually left on the coffee table before he went abroad, the models on the shelving partition, and the scarf draped over the back of the sofa. He didn't like others touching his things. When she moved in, she tried to tidy up for him but got a few cold words in return, and she dared not touch anything again. Thinking of that timid figure, he felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance. Pushing open the bedroom door and finding her room also empty and tidy increased this annoyance. After graduating from college, he broke ties with his father and moved out in a fit of anger, buying this apartment. At that time, who would have thought he would end up sharing the same roof with that person's daughter? She had a beautiful face, pure and gentle, much like her mother, the woman who had been the white moonlight in his father's heart. Even though she later married someone else, it couldn't make his father forget. But that pure and gentle face stirred resentment in his mother's heart, so from a young age, he detested that woman. Consequently, he had no fondness for her, who bore a similar face. Then why stop her from resigning? He couldn't answer his own question. Winter closed the bedroom door and glanced out of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The night was deep, and the glass reflected the brilliant lights in the room. The next day, Winter arrived at the law firm on time. Passing by the new assistant's desk, he noticed it was empty. He frowned, entered the office, handled several clients, organized case documents, and by the time he came out of the office, it was already noon. The position was still vacant. He couldn't describe his feelings, furrowed his brows for a while, then instructed, "Clear that position." After saying that, he turned and left. "Hey, Winter, there's no need to be so harsh," Linda stopped him. "Summer and I took leave. She didn't want to break a bone. Isn't it a bit too much to fire her for this?" Winter paused, turned around, and asked, "Break a bone?" Summer, with a thick cast on her ankle, struggled to walk, supporting herself on the railing toward the hospital water room. Holding the phone, she said, "No, really, there's no need to come over. You have to work too, right?" She finally persuaded her friend on the other end. Hanging up the phone, she accidentally spilled hot water on her hand when the cup overflowed. She exclaimed, tossing the cup away, hot water splashing on the floor. Instinctively stepping back, her injured ankle caused another sharp pain. A hand reached from behind and calmly turned off the tap. Summer was stunned for a moment, then was picked up horizontally and placed on the edge of the sink. "Give me your hand," a voice, cold to the extreme, sounded from above. She hesitated but extended her hand, letting him hold it under the cold water. The scorching fingertips found some relief under the cold water. When Summer came back to her senses, she couldn't help but raise her head to sneak a peek. At this angle, she could clearly see his pitch-black long lashes, and beneath those lashes, his eyes were unusually focused and serious. Summer's breath caught, and for some reason, her heart was in a flutter. "Do you think that since it's at the hospital, you can handle burns on the spot?" The indifferent voice echoed from above, devoid of any discernible emotion. Summer lowered her head, and after a while, she could only stutter, "I'm sorry." Winter glanced at her and didn't know what emotions he had. "My name is not sorry." "Huh?" Summer was taken aback. "Is "I'm sorry" the only thing you can say to me every time?" She finally realized, almost blurting out, "I'm sorry" again but managed to hold it back. Lowering her head, she blushed uncontrollably. But she forgot to ask why he came to see her. The reason for this bone fracture was also a coincidence. Her new rented house was in the old city area, and the stairs were still the old wooden ones. She had to be careful with each step as the aged wood creaked. In a hurry to get to work, she took a slightly faster step, unexpectedly breaking one step and falling down the stairs. When Winter brought her home, the broken step was still lying there. Winter glanced at the broken part, then at her, looking quite displeased. Struggling to get out of the car, Summer awkwardly said, "I am not actually that heavy. 90 pounds, and she managed to break a stair." She felt hopeless. Winter, the lawyer, made no comment on her defense. He just picked her up horizontally, carefully bypassed the broken step, and went upstairs. Summer stayed cautiously in his arms, not daring to speak. Thinking back, from the first meeting until today seemed to be the day she was closest to him. Although they had lived under the same roof for the 6 years before, that person was always like the bright moon in the sky, seemingly within reach but ultimately elusive. The stairs were in disrepair for many years, and the bathroom was shared on an entire floor. Even boiling water required plugging in the electric kettle in the adjacent room. After seeing a few suspicious-looking hooligans downstairs, Winter finally couldn't bear it any longer. Later, go and terminate the lease on this house. Summer struggled to pour tea in front of the old coffee table to show a token gesture of hospitality, but the words puzzled her. He turned around, coldly furrowing his brows. Do you want to make the front page of the social news? In a place like this, there might be drug addicts or murderers lurking around. Haven't you seen such cases during your classes? It's not that bad, she mumbled, feeling a lack of confidence in herself. How could she not know the danger? But the rent in this area was the cheapest in City A. Just out of school, where could she find enough money? She had no choice but to endure it. Winter didn't seem interested in arguing with her. He just said, or move back to the apartment. I don't want to. She almost instantly rejected it without hesitation, lowering her head and not daring to look at his displeased expression. Then change houses. A tone without room for negotiation. Summer bit her lip and fell silent. Winter stared at her, his brows furrowing even more. She appeared timid and easy to bully, yet she had an obstinate temper. Even if she was in a bad mood, she would bow her head, seemingly submissive but actually unyielding. If you move to a better neighborhood, the money in your account should be enough, right? Taking a deep breath, he surprisingly softened his tone. If the colleagues at the law firm saw this, they would be amazed. Summer didn't raise her head, showing her reluctance. That money isn't mine. I won't use it. The amount in her account was staggering, with countless zeros after the numbers. It all came from Winter's father as gifts, managed by a dedicated lawyer and transferred to her account after she came of age. However, she never touched a penny, relying on part-time jobs to cover her expenses during college. Even so, she still felt indebted. Moreover, she harbored a bigger secret in her heart. Feeling an inexplicable frustration, he furrowed his brows, not understanding her insistence. Since the will states that you are the beneficiary of the estate, don't the firm's regulations prohibit employees from living in such places? Not wanting to argue about this topic any longer, Summer gathered courage and interrupted him. If not, Mr. Winter, what identity are you using to ask me to move? Winter, who had been turned the tables on, was momentarily stunned. Yes, what identity did he have? He had previously stated that they had no relationship, so why care about her safety? A smile crept up on the corner of Winter's lips, but there was a hint of suppressed anger in his eyes. Sorry, I overstepped, Miss Summer. As soon as the words were spoken, Summer knew she had messed up again. She lowered her head, unable to come up with a sentence to ease the atmosphere. After a silence, the sound of the door slamming behind him came from behind. He left. She struggled to lean against the wall and moved to the window, watching his car drive away from the residential building. Actually, long before she first met Winter, Summer had heard his name countless times. After her mother passed away due to illness, she was supposed to be transferred to a nearby welfare institution. However, Winter's father somehow found out about her and took her out of the welfare institution. That's not a good place. A middle-aged man with graying temples squatted down, gently patting her head and saying so with a smile. He found her another place to stay, arranged for her to go to school, and covered all living expenses. Later, she learned that all of this was because of her mother, the girl he had admired when he was young. He often visited her, asking her about her mother. She answered each question. Occasionally, he would talk about his son, a hint of pride in his tone, always starting with, "Your brother, Winter." Winter, brother. She remembered that name and everything associated with it. She knew he studied law, excelling in his studies. She knew he partnered with others to open a law firm, winning several major cases, gaining prominence in City A. In her mind, she outlined his figure, imagining him as the just and gentle hero in a storybook. However, she truly met him at the funeral of Winter's father. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and against the backlight, she saw his expression, cold as ice. When he took her away from the memorial hall, she subconsciously wanted to hold his hand, but he merely tilted his body, skillfully avoiding it. It was then she realized, he disliked her. After enduring being a solo adventurer with a cast for a long time, Summer finally got it removed. Before leaving work, Emma, the fellow assistant, came over and asked, "Want to join us for dinner after work?" Summer hesitated for a moment, catching a glimpse of Winter passing by the tea room. He seemed to have heard their conversation, casting a faint glance in their direction. Since the argument in the rented house a month ago, he had hardly spoken to her. But perhaps she was overthinking. After all, they had never interacted much. Coming back to her senses, she found Emma still waiting for her answer. So, she nodded, "Sure, I'll go." It started raining heavily when they left work. Winter stood at the door, seemingly waiting for someone. Summer walked out of the building with her colleagues, and as they passed by him, she couldn't help but quicken her pace. "Why are you walking so fast?" Emma, by her side, didn't notice and pulled her, then turned to ask him, "Lawyer Winter, waiting for someone?" He lowered his head, gave her a deep look, his dark eyes revealing no emotions. Summer lowered her head, unsure where this sudden guilt came from. "No," he replied briefly, opened his umbrella, and walked into the rain. Summer watched his retreating figure, feeling an inexplicable illusion. It seemed like he was just waiting for her. The so-called office gathering included only the three of them as colleagues. The other three seemed to be engineers from the software company upstairs. During the meal, Summer quietly asked Emma, "Doesn't this count as a social gathering?" Emma whispered back, "Calling it a social gathering makes us seem less marketable." It made sense, and Summer had no words to argue. After the meal, they went for karaoke, playing until 10 o'clock before dispersing. The male engineer across from her was very gentlemanly, seeing her off downstairs before returning. Summer watched the car drive away before turning to go upstairs. The stairwell lights had long been broken, and in the darkness, only a faint glow from a cigarette lit up, revealing the handsome profile of a man. Summer's breath caught, and for a moment, she felt a dryness in her throat that prevented her from speaking. Why did he appear here again? "So, is this the reason you won't move back to the apartment?" He extinguished the cigarette, looked up at her, his gaze seemingly carrying a deeper meaning. Hanging out with a man until late at night, having someone escort you downstairs. If the relationship goes a step further and you need to go upstairs for a cup of tea, it could indeed be inconvenient. Absolutely unreasonable. Summer was inexplicably provoked. Looking up at him, she said, "Of course, not just having tea, even if..." He dangerously raised his eyes, interrupting her, "Even if what?" Summer paused, took a deep breath to calm herself before saying, "On what grounds does Lawyer Winter inquire about these matters?" Grounds? This word seemed like a curse. He resumed his indifferent attitude, gazing at her with deep, dark eyes. "I certainly have no grounds." Summer lowered her head, walked past him intending to open the door, and said, "That's good then. But I also have no intention of arguing with you about these." The cold voice sounded from behind her. Before Summer could react, everything spun, and when she regained consciousness, he had already lifted her horizontally. Summer exclaimed, instinctively clutching his shirt. If you can break free, I'll let you stay in such a place." He spoke calmly, carrying her downstairs. "Let go of me." Summer was both angry and anxious, but the fists pounding on him couldn't shake him at all. "What relation do I have with you? Why do you have the right to control me?" The poor sound insulation of the old residential building allowed their quarrel to echo through half the building. An elderly woman poked her head out from the stairs. "Young people, be quieter when you're dating." Summer was choked by these words, her face flushing. However, she was unwilling to back down and continued fiercely pounding him. "Why?" Winter paid no attention, halted his steps, and calmly lowered his head to gaze at her. "So, Summer, tell me, why did you kiss me secretly at that time?" Summer froze, the strength to struggle seemed to drain from her body in an instant. She opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word, her heart pounding wildly. How could he know? Summer didn't know exactly when she developed this secretive affection for him. But from a small seed, that thought gradually grew into an enormous vine she couldn't ignore. It was the summer after the college entrance exam when she came back from the teacher appreciation banquet. Upon entering the living room to change her shoes, she found him at home. He was wearing soft loungewear, resting with closed eyes on the rocking chair, and the magazine in his hand was only half flipped. The world seemed to fall silent for a moment. She stood there, staring blankly at him. The little alcohol she had at the banquet felt like high-proof alcohol running through her veins, and her ears buzzed with the rushing sound of blood. She should hurry back to her room before he woke up. Yet, as if enchanted, she walked towards him. He had his eyes closed, long eyelashes resting on his lower eyelids, appearing tranquil and gentle, quite different from his usual self. He disliked her, really disliked her. Even though this cognition repeatedly played in her mind, she couldn't control herself as she leaned down, closed her eyes, and cautiously kissed those thin lips. They were soft and cool, like a dream that was too easy to wake up from. But once immersed, it became irresistibly enticing. In the quiet living room during the afternoon breeze, she suddenly woke up, feeling as if she had stolen an unparalleled treasure. With an agitated heart, she escaped back to her room. The next day, when she woke up, his door was tightly locked. The cleaning lady who was responsible for cleaning told her that he was going abroad for some time, but for how long and for what purpose, she didn't know. The half-flipped magazine was left on the coffee table, untouched by anyone. Even when she was placed on the sofa in the apartment, Summer kept her head low, not saying a word. "Take a day off tomorrow and move your things back." Winter poured water in the kitchen and handed it to her, but she didn't take it. He placed the water on the coffee table and continued, "If the rent can't be refunded, don't bother about it. Don't entangle yourself." "Why?" She finally spoke, but it was a sentence without a clear beginning or end. He didn't answer, just quietly looked at her. It seemed as if she was being unreasonable. "You obviously dislike me a lot." Summer bit her lip, and her slightly reddened eyes revealed a hint of vulnerability. He subconsciously avoided looking at her trembling shoulders and calmly said, "I don't have the necessity to like you." His calm voice made it sound like the most natural thing in the world, but it left Summer frozen in place. It was like returning to that small funeral home years ago, where she reached out to hold his hand, but he just slightly turned away, effortlessly avoiding her. Embarrassment and discomfort surged like a black tide, making her feel thoroughly suffocated. Indeed, he had no necessity for this. Sharing the same roof, all the care he showed her, these were all due to Winter's father's dying request. Despite his aversion, he couldn't go against his father's wishes. On the contrary, she, who had received so much kindness from the Winter family, dared to harbor such unrealistic thoughts about him. It was simply shameless. Summer struggled to regain her composure. After a long while, she whispered, "I'm sorry, I misunderstood." Winter glanced at her and then averted his gaze. Suddenly, an inexplicable sense of discomfort welled up in his heart. Yet, even he didn't know where this discomfort originated from. After that incident, time seemed to pass quickly. Summer found a reliable place to live near the company and moved there. This time, Winter didn't say anything. While working at the law firm, he was the busy lawyer, and she was the diligent assistant. They didn't have much interaction. Perhaps, this was how it should be between her and Winter. If it weren't for Winter's father's adoption, they would have been completely unrelated. Fortunately, after a chaotic intersection, their paths finally diverged. Soon, graduation arrived, and Summer took a 2-week leave to handle various matters at school. One night, while having dinner with friends, Summer, holding a beer can, felt a bit dizzy. Suddenly, a big guy from her class, nervously holding a bouquet of flowers, tapped her shoulder. He could barely articulate, "Summer, I like you. Can you be my girlfriend?" Amidst the noise of friends cheering, traffic on the nearby road, clinking glasses, and the sounds of the TV in the street food stall, Summer, in her alcohol-induced haze, saw a familiar figure standing in the distance. She scolded herself silently. Why was she seeing him everywhere? Rolling her eyes, she looked at the guy in front of her, and in her tipsy state, she finally smiled gently, "Sure, why not? What could go wrong?" Everyone held on to the last moments of their youth tightly, continuing the revelry until late at night when they dispersed. The guy acted as her chaperone, unwilling to leave until he sent her downstairs. "Summer, She agreed too quickly, leaving him with a surreal feeling. He urgently wanted to grasp onto something to prove the reality of this moment. He held her shoulders, nervously pursed his lips, and Summer, in a daze, stared at him. However, her gaze suddenly went past him and fell on someone standing behind him. The guy was about to lean in for a kiss, but she abruptly pushed him away. Confused, he followed her gaze. A man stood under the streetlight, his gaze fixed on them. "Who is that?" Summer bit her lip, hating her own confusion at this moment. She forced herself to remain calm and said, "My brother." The guy was about to say something more, but she stopped him, "Just go back." He looked at the two people, sensing something strange, but without asking further, he obediently left. As he walked away, Summer turned to go upstairs, but the man reached out and grabbed her. When his warm fingers touched her, she couldn't help but turn back, yelling, "What do you want?" Almost at the moment these words slipped out, tears uncontrollably streamed down her face. Winter pursed his lips, staying silent, calmly watching her release her pent-up emotions. "Can't I like someone else? Do I have to like only you? Even if I kissed you, so what? It's just a kiss." "Just a kiss?" He coldly repeated her words, but there was a hint of gritted teeth in his tone. "Yes, just a kiss. Before he could react, she cupped his face, stood on tiptoe, and almost frantically kissed those thin lips. He was momentarily stunned, and in the next moment, she pushed him away without any mercy. Stepping back 2 paces, she wiped her lips harshly with her sleeve. "See, it's just a kiss. What's so special about it?" Having said that, she left him standing there in a daze, turning to walk away. However, just as she took 2 steps, she was pulled back. After a moment of disorientation, the next instant was his face suddenly approaching. The unreleased exclamation was swallowed as he fiercely kissed her lips. Rolling and stirring, his breath rushed in urgently, dominating all her breaths, as if retaliating for their earlier brief contact. Stripped away was the icy and indifferent facade. This kiss was scorching and heart-pounding. Until the end, when he released her, there was silence all around. A dim streetlight in the distance was only enough to illuminate the small space beneath it. "Why?" Summer hesitated to speak, not clear on what she wanted to ask. Her heart pounded uncontrollably, as if an answer was about to burst out. "Why?" Winter lowered his head, staring directly into her eyes with a cold expression that concealed an unsettling emotion. "I also want to know why. I should hate you, shouldn't I?" She probably found him inexplicable because he felt the same way about himself. He should hate her, but that time she was harassed by thugs and waited at the police station until midnight. He spent the entire night searching for her in the cold wind. Even after that, he arranged for a familiar driver to pick her up and drop her off every day for school, just to put his mind at ease. He should hate her, but that summer when she leaned down to kiss him, he instinctively chose to pretend to be asleep. If she had opened her eyes at that moment, she might have noticed the hand he clenched on the armrest, unconsciously tightening. After returning to the country, he even dared not go back to his own apartment, choosing to stay in a suite on the top floor of a hotel. However, that cautiously gentle kiss continued to linger in his heart, making him uneasy and nervous. He dared not confirm what it meant until she appeared before him again. Her awkwardness when she met him, her desire to resign just because of working with him, her moving out and returning the apartment key to him, her urgent attempt to distance herself from him left him inexplicably irritated. Not to mention seeing her living in such a place. Since taking charge of her, he handled all her living expenses. Every aspect was equivalent to that of a rich heiress. Where had she ever lived in such a place? It had always been like this. He clearly disliked her, but he couldn't stand seeing her suffer. Why? This question was about to be answered, but the person who caused it suddenly realized something, frantically attempting to turn around and escape. He leaned in, encircling her shoulder, not allowing her to retreat. "Answer me, Summer. Why did you steal a kiss from me? Why didn't you let me keep hating you? Why did she disturb him?" As the answer was about to be revealed, Summer escaped. Her explanation was, "I need to think." In reality, she had no idea what she needed to think about. Her mind was a mess, and her cheeks were flushed. She rushed back to her apartment, splashing her face with cold water at the sink to regain some composure. But then she thought of him. Was what he did a confession? Or was it just her misunderstanding and overinterpretation? Summer's thoughts and emotions looped endlessly, keeping her awake almost the entire night. The next morning, before the alarm clock rang, she woke up. With a heavy heart, she finished her morning routine and arrived downstairs at the company. However, as soon as she stepped into the elevator, she was stunned. It was him. Perhaps because it was still early, only she and he were in the elevator. The floor numbers jumped one by one, but neither of them spoke. Finally, it was Summer who broke the silence. "About your questions yesterday?" She spoke softly. "I figured out the answers." Winter's breath paused, but he remained composed. "I like you, always have." She forced a casual smile to conceal the nervousness in her voice. "I know I'm a mess. Despite all the favors from your family, despite you hating me, I still, she liked him. Liked him to the point that even if he took just half a step, she would be willing to overcome the remaining 99.5 steps. Liked him enough to bravely reveal all her feelings to him, without fear. It was like the first time they met when she reached out her hand towards him. "I can keep liking you like this, but I want to know when this kind of liking will." Before she could finish her sentence, the elevator suddenly stopped. The doors opened, and people streamed inside, creating a noisy atmosphere in the confined space. Summer bit her lip, glancing at him, who remained expressionless. She felt frustrated. She wanted to know when this kind of liking would get a response. The elevator slowly reached their destination, and perhaps the remaining questions had no chance to be spoken. She lowered her head, intending to step out of the elevator. At that moment, he suddenly reached out and pulled her back. It was just a simple intertwining of their fingers, but she felt a strange heartbeat for a moment, allowing him to lead her out of the elevator. Standing in the elevator hall, more people began to pass by. He showed no intention of letting her go, just lowering his head, his dark eyes fixedly gazing at her. "Do you want an answer?" he said. "The answer is now." He said, "Now." The person who had tossed and turned in contemplation all night wasn't just her. In the long course of time, he had hated her, avoided her, and inevitably, he fell in love with her. If everything was a predetermined fate, and he was destined to be moved by her, then he had indeed wasted too much time. So, why not start from now? From now on, he would hold her hand. Summer was momentarily stunned, only realizing that this was the answer to the previous question. A smile involuntarily appeared at the corner of her mouth. She lowered her head and gently held his hand. From the first meeting until now, the hand she reached out had finally held the hand she wanted to hold.